episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Had a lovely email from Hannah Tuchek, thanking you for the review, and seemed to be quite happy. He didn't say anything negative, shall we say. And I often wonder about sort of, when I do episodes of the show, and I obviously then contact the supplier, be it a distillery or what have you, and I often get a sort of a nice email back saying thank you, we'll watch it later, and generally speaking that's pretty much all I ever hear. Occasionally I get the odd one saying, well, I actually watched it, I might have agreed with some bits and disagreed with others, and sometimes they just say, yep, great episode. And I just hope that everybody, you guys included, appreciate the fact that it's an honest, unbiased review that I give. You send me a whiskey for the show, or sometimes just a taste for purchasing, and I'll obviously give it a fair crack at the whip, even if it is horribly sherried and possibly, a Deanston maybe. Anyway, no Deanston today. So today's episode of the show, I kind of gone away from the independent sort of reviews because I've done a fair few of them of recent, and I wanted to take a look at some new releases from two of my favourite distilleries, the Penderyn, or the Gwalia, I believe is the pronunciation of the distillery. It's the Gwalia distillery in the southern part of Wales, and Wireworks, or White Peaks distillery, just up the road in Derbyshire. Obviously White Peaks have not been quite going as long as Penderyn, but I think they are producing some great whiskies, and they are technically the local distillery, so become a big fan of theirs. Now, I mean, I'll probably say this every time I do an episode of the show on Penderyn, but back in the day when they did their first release, which I think was about 2004, Gauntlets were the first retailer outside of South Wales to actually have any bottles, and this was all because my dearly departed mother was from the Rhondda. She was born in the Rhondda, and every year she would go home to visit family and friends down there, and she would come back with a bottle of the distillery's Merlin liqueur, which incidentally they've now decided to stop doing, and my mother would not be happy if she was still alive, I can tell you that for a start. But so every year she would go down and she would bring back a bottle of Merlin, and one particular year could well have been around about sort of like 2002, 2003, something like that. She didn't, for whatever the reason was, travel down to see family and what have you, and asked if I would get hold of a bottle for her. So I phoned up the distillery to see if I could get a deal, and the lady I spoke to basically said, "Oh, we're about to release a single malt shortly," and I said, "Oh, all right, that's interesting." And bear in mind that this was, back in a time when new distilleries cropping up was not as kind of often as they are these days. This was actually quite a big deal, and certainly, well, a big deal for Wales anyway. So she said, "Do you want some?" And I said, "Well, yeah, all right, I'll have 6 when it's released." And she said, 6 cases, and I thought, God, bloody hell, 6 cases, what the hell am I supposed to do with 36 bottles of a brand new Welsh whiskey no one's ever heard of? No one's probably going to buy it. It's going to be a hard sell. And I said, no, I'll just take the 6 bottles. Well, I wish I had taken the 6 cases, because, everybody and their mother wanted a bottle. I had expats that were living all over the world phoning me up saying, I hear you've got some Welsh whiskey, or emailing and what have you, and well, it just all went. I mean, we also sold quite a number of their not the Millennium cask, but their first release. This particular bottle in here, which came in this rather lavish case, so 450 bottles. This was the first release, this I think was bottle 190 something, I think. But so yes, that's it's proudly in the collection. I believe the distillery actually had to purchase one of these back at auction to put in their museum, because they didn't have one, and paid quite a lot of money for it, I believe. But anyway, that's by the by. So my relationship with Penderyn has been quite long. We don't sell as much of it, I'm afraid to say, as what we used to do. I remember at one stage the Madeira finish was probably one of our biggest selling whiskies, but unfortunately, like everything these days, it sells in a bit, but obviously nowhere near as much as what it used to, unfortunately. But anyway, so the distillery just coming back to that, I finished my tall tale. The distillery company sent me some samples recently. Well, I asked for them samples actually of some of their new releases. So I've got 3 new releases from Gwalia and 3 new releases from White Peaks. So as there's not really a great deal to say other than what I've already said, I think it's time to just introduce the lineup. So the first bottle we'll be looking at is from the Icons of Wales series, which this is number 12, and it's called Copperopolis, bottled at 46%. Now I believe this was because Swansea in the south was a hotbed of copper production, I believe, and so this has been matured in or finished in ex-sweet red wine casks. They didn't state which ones, and I suppose the whole point was to maybe give it a slight copper tinge, which it has a little bit. I mean, in actual fact, I mean, if you look at the Amarone finish from White Peaks, that's more of a copper colour. But anyway, we will see what that is all about. Bottling number 2, I think it's the first 10-year-old they've actually released. I could be wrong in this. This is at the Icons of Wales number 13, Bad Wolf, 10-year-old. Love the packaging. You know, it just says something to me. I mean, I know, yes, it's all about said juice in the bottle rather than the packaging, but apparently Bad Wolf are a film-making company that are based in Wales, but I just think that the bottle looks pretty cool, actually. You know, whoever came up with it, the artwork for that label was pretty impressive, has to be said. Anyway, this has been, I think, 100% matured in tawny port casks, and again bottled at 46%. The last of the 3 bottlings from Gwalia is the first release from their new distillery up in the north in Llandudno, I think is how you pronounce it. Sorry, I'm just spitting everywhere. So this is called Serpents Tears. Again, love the packaging, love the label, and this is apparently bottled at 46%, I think all aged in American oak and peated. Properly. As you know, Penderyn do a peated malt, but it's in that classic sort of finishing in ex-peated casks. I mean, and to be honest with you, maybe the first ones to do it, and everybody else has been doing it since, because it works. But this, I believe, is properly full on the real McCoy peated barley jobby, so looking forward to that. Right, so on to the 3 new releases from White Peaks. This is the Necessary Evil, this year's release, as you well know, finished in Thornbridge Imperial Stout casks and bottled at 51.3%. Second bottle we're looking at is the Amarone finish. This is been bottled literally sort of, well, this month possibly, and bottled at 53.6%, aged in American oak, and then obviously finished in ex-Amarone casks. And the final bottling is what they are calling Coastal Smoke, bottled at 50%. So this is a batch made up from there. You may well recall that they did, I can't remember the name of the bottling now, it's just completely gone out of my head, but they did a bottling where they'd altered their cut points, and apparently this is made up of both of those types of spirits, so they're sort of standard, if you like, and they're altered cut points. Alter Ego, that was it. Knew I'd get there eventually. So this is matured in first fill ex-bourbon casks from Heaven Hill apparently, and then finished in Islay whiskey barrels, and they have called it Coastal Smoke. So I guess the idea is kind of like at the moment independent bottling companies seem to have a fetish for sort of like sticking Ardmore into ex-Lefroy casks. So you're getting that kind of dual peat kind of character, the dry peat, but you're also getting the Islay kind of character. So that's obviously what the distillery are aiming for, so we shall see whether that's successful or not. But before we get to that point, we're going to kick off with a bit of Copperopolis. Right, okay, so let's start with the Copperopolis. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? It's pleasantly fruity, damp barley, bourbon, plenty of bourbony oak, there's a bit of pear, there's some peach. The finishing cask is really quite subtle, actually. There's only a real sort of edge of red fruit. There's a slight, almost kind of struck match note as well, which is just kind of, I hate to say it, but irritating me a little bit. Aside from that, if it didn't have that slight struck match note, the balance is absolutely lovely, really, really nice. It has some lovely fruitiness, which is a kind of trademark to a certain extent of the Penderyn spirit, and a subtle winey influence. But yeah, there's just that. I mean, you know, a lot of people probably wouldn't pick up on that, but I have, unfortunately, a predisposition to pick up on that kind of character, as you well know. Anyway, let's see what passes up. That's lovely. Silky, soft, sweet red fruits to kick off with, a little barley, some peach, apricot, vanilla. A little sweet on the mid palate, but 46% alcohol kind of keeps that nicely in check. There's a little bit of citric notes as well to sort of add to that. Nice finish. Don't get the struck match note. I do get some cocoa powder, and there's a slight floral edge to the Amarone sort of red winey fruit notes. So if it wasn't for that edge on the nose, that slight struck match note on the nose, I would love this whiskey, it has to be said. And it just this is the thing about whiskey, sometimes they just come down to the smallest of points at the end of the day. But aside from that, I thought that was a lovely Okay, so let's move on to the Bad Wolf 10-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Firstly, no blemishes. Clean as a whistle. Again, wonderfully balanced. The tawny port is not slapping you in the face. It is, you know, although apparently matured in tawny port, I'm guessing that it's not all been matured in tawny port. I would imagine a vatting of some that's just been aged in ex-Americano, because if it had been entirely aged 100% in tawny port, there would be a lot more tawny port influence. As is beautifully balanced, quite delicate, elegant, floral, orange blossom, barley, apple, red cherry. This has got a lovely complexity, it has to be said. Lovely and mature as well, although I'm not getting any kind of sawdusty oak notes. I mean, it's probably not old enough for that, but you know, so it's a lovely nose. It's got a mellowness, and it's off sweet spice notes and delicately balanced, quite floral. Just a lovely whiskey, it has to be said. So I'll pass on. That is beautifully succulent. A little bit more tawny fruit on the palate. The cask is a little bit more active and showing a lot more autumnal dried fruits, black red fruits, tawny fruits, but still balanced. I get a little bit of barley, I get a little bit of peach, I get some vanilla, a pear. It's a little drying on the finish. The tannins do kind of come in a little bit on the finish, but the weight of fruit and barley and the character of the spirit, even though it's quite delicate, is robust at the same time. And that again is another thing that I love about the Penderyn spirit, is that it, and I guess it's all down to the hybrid still that they run, that it has weight, but it has a sort of a delicacy and an elegance as well. And like I said, I think that's always been the hallmark of the distillery. So that was bloody good. Right, okay, so on to the final bottling. This is the Serpents Tears. Let's see what the first release from the North Wales distillery is like. Young, very young. not out of its nappies. It's only 4 years old, and yeah, it smells like it's a 4-year-old. It's still got the faints, shall we say. It's quite subtle again. Again, there's an elegance there. There's some earthy peat, barley. Again, it has that sort of autumnal fruit kind of character. Well, more autumnal leaves, I would say. Sort of, you know, not decomposing leaves, but sort of damp autumnal leaves. Go and sniff out in the garden to get that kind of character. There's a little bit of dry wood smoke. There's a bit of peat smoke. It's a bit lacking. I mean, there are elements there, but it's a bit too young, I think. I mean, it is interesting to see what the spirit is like coming out of that the distillery. I'd love to see some unpeated spirit to sort of get a full idea of the character of what they're producing there. But you know, it's not too shabby. I think if you bought this, you wouldn't be too upset. It has to be said. And I suppose part of me does quite like the sort of the youthful rawness of the spirit. Let's see what the pal's like. Again, the palate is quite youthful, earthy, fainty, bit dry, oily, quite more oils than Penderyn. A little bit of bittering oak, a little bit of vanilla, dry peat on the finish. Again, there's a slight floral element there as well. It's a bit of a conundrum, this one. I mean, I kind of like it, but I would like to have seen a little bit more age on it, it has to be said, just to remove that sort of fainty element. But then again, it is what it is. It's the first release from the Llandudno distillery, and yeah, it shows that that the spirit is going to be pretty good eventually when it's had a bit more time in the cask. So, moving on to the first of the White Peaks distillery, this is the Necessary Evil. Now, I know why it's called Necessary Evil, but I love stout cask finishes. I love stout, you know, that's my favourite beer. And so, you know, sticking whiskey and my favourite beer together, whoa, you know, I'm in heaven. But, you know, it's got to be balanced, and this is balanced. It's got that lovely stouty character, a bit of barley, some minerals, obvious alcohol notes. I mean, it's 51.3, but it seems to be coming across as more alcoholic than that. There's some creamy oak, there's some creamy stouty character as well. Black fruit, earth, a little bit of peat, bit of menthol, a bit of smoke, nice astringency, good complexity. What's not to like? It has to be said, you know, if you like your peated malts. And this has got a nice level of peat, you know, good intensity, but not too peaty that's going to scare you off. And like I said, the balance of the stouty fruits is kind of really nice. Let's see what it passes like. A bit more heavier on the cask, but some barley notes do kind of come through. There's a sweetness there. I love the sweet, stouty black fruits mingling in with a little bit of earth. Not as much peat as the nose would kind of assume, shall we say. But there is a little bit of peat. There's a little bit of citrus. A little mass. My mouth is watering a little bit more. This is more what I would expect 51% to be like. Like I said, on the nose, the alcohol was a little bit sort of intense for its ABV, but I like that. That's really nice. That's really nicely balanced. And again, I think this is with the exception of the port finish that the Wireworks do, which or White Peaks do. I think both distilleries impeccable balance when they're using other types of casks. A little bit more barley, there's a little less stoutiness now. It's a bit sweeter, the peat has practically disappeared, and so it kind of leaves that sort of sweet barley note kind of and a little bit of sweet oak as well, more front and centre. Let's see what pass on that. The palate is fairly similar, although there's a little bit more stoutiness there, but it's softer and it's more relegated to the mid palate, whereas it kind of more opens up with the barley and a little bit of American oak. Again, not as much peat. The peat really only comes through on the finish, and it has a real ashiness to it. Personally, I think I prefer that neat, but I think, you know, with a little drop of water works just as nicely, although you get less of the stout kind of character, which, you know, some people may well say is a good thing, but yeah, I personally think neat is the best way for that particular one. But either way, great whiskey. Okay, so let's move on to the Amarone. Let's see what the notes give us on this end, shall we? Quite a fair amount of chunky sort of red fruits, sweet red fruits, lots of Amarone, but again, there's some nice barley notes, some sweet vanilla, marzipan, touch of peat, just a little touch of peat. I think the balance is fairly good. I like it. It is a little bit skewed towards the wood, but it's certainly not as blanketing as the portwood that they release. I just think they obviously must have a real fetish for the portwood, because everything they do that involves a port cask tends to end up being overly port cask. This, however, I think, although like I said, is moving towards the dark side, is certainly better balanced. Yeah, I like it. Intense. It's a little bit simple, dare I say it. You know, it is kind of cask, bit of barley, bit of peat. You know, I should say that about probably most whiskies at the end of the day, to be fair. But I think it does what it does really nicely. Let's see what the pal's like. I like that palate. It kind of kicks off with the Amarone. You get the sweet, juicy red cherry, red currant fruit, and then the citrus sort of builds along with that sort of slightly astringent peat note kind of coming through on the mid palate. It's a bit masked, but the citrus kind of lingers along with a little bit of minerality, some earthy peat as well, and then finally the kind of sweet, juicy Amarone fruits come back on the finish. So it's got a really lovely progression. This I love whiskies that do this, that kind of open up on one particular flavour, move into another selection of flavours, and then return to the original character on the finish. And it kind of it's almost like bookending, if you like. So kind of like the Amarone is bookending the kind of spirit character which kind of comes through on the mid palate. So that was really nice. And again, like I said, really quite balanced. Let's put a little drop of water. Don't want to put too much. So there's not a lot of juice left in that bottle, in that glass. It's a bit leaner now. It's the Amarone is still noticeable. It's lost some of that fatness, if you like. It's got more of a crisp white fruits and red fruits kind of note. Less peat again, less marzipan, less American oak. It's a bit simpler again. But it's got a nice kind of crispness to it now. Personally, again, I think I prefer the nose neat. So pass on. The palate is crisper and fresher. There's a more pronounced red cherry note now. Again, not as complex, certainly doesn't seem to kind of have the progression that it does when it's neat, but then a lot often tends to happen. You sort of dilute a whiskey a little bit, knock off some of the alcohol, and it kind of makes it more of a sort of like a morass, if you like, of flavours, as opposed to a sort of like a progression. But that's a lovely morass, it has to be said. Good title for the show, actually, I suppose, isn't it? It's a lovely morass. Yeah, I like that. Nice whiskey. So on to the final whisky of the afternoon. This is the Coastal Smoke. So let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? It's quite reserved. There's some nice off-sweet barley, there's some apricot, pear, there's a little bit of a coastal saltiness there. There's not a lot of peat. In actual fact, it's really subtle. It's a little bit of, it's a bit of tobacco, possibly tobacco leaf, some dry peat. I'm having to work this nose. It's not really giving an awful lot at all. It's all a bit, I say, a bit reserved, and there's a slight metallic element there as well, which is kind of just jarring a little bit. I have to say, I'm not really getting this for something that's supposed to be sort of, you know, made up of all these interesting components. It doesn't seem to. Maybe it's me. Am I not getting it? I don't know. But it's just sort of a bit reserved. It's a bit, you know. It just feels like. Maybe it's because it's neat. Maybe once I put a little drop of water, it'll just suddenly open up, and I'll just go, oh wow, you know. But at the moment, it's kind of just a bit tight, you know. But I mean, it's only 50% for goodness sake. It shouldn't be this kind of tight. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Okay, so the palate is a little bit more expressive. I love the lemony sort of citric notes it kind of kicks off with, and some barley, sweet apricot, nice creamy vanilla mid-palate, some saltiness, a little bit of dry peat. I'm getting a little bit of Isla peat now on the aftertaste, a little bit of astringent peat, a little bit of almost kind of menthol possibly. Again, it's a bit short. I don't think it needs any water. I think if I put a little, I mean, I've got a little bit left. I'll probably put a little bit of water with, but I don't think it's going to do an awful lot of favours. Again, it's pleasant. It's okay. It's just, but it just doesn't sort of grip me by the watsits. It has to be said, and I wanted to say a lot more. I think the palate is a lot more expressive than the nose, but it you know. I'm possibly being a little overly picky, maybe, but then that's the point of being a critic. You know, there's no point in just saying, well, everything's bloody marvellous, is there? It's a bit sweeter. There's a bit more kind of Alsatian white fruits kind of on the nose now, but again, the peat has practically disappeared. I mean, there's a little bit of a saltiness, a slight salinity maybe, but again, I'm not getting the nose. Let's see what the pass like. Again, the palate's quite sweet and fruity. There's no peat. There's a little bit of oak, a little bit of vanilla, but again, practically all the other sort of peat notes and earth and all that kind of stuff seems to have disappeared once you put a little bit of water with it. I think I was expecting more from it, I suppose, at the end of the day. I mean, it's not a bad whiskey, and like I always say, make up your own minds, please. You know, you may well love that. To me, it just didn't it just wasn't there, wasn't quite there. And that's the thing with whiskey at the end of the day. You know, you sort of, you know, plan a bottling, you think, yeah, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to put it all together, and, you know, sometimes it just doesn't work out quite as you expect, but, you know, sometimes you've kind of like almost committed yourself to doing it, so you kind of have to bottle it. Not that I'm saying that was the reason for that. I'm sure that just the guys at the distillery absolutely loved this and thought it was brilliant. For me, yeah, I'm not kind of quite getting it, but yeah. Aside from that, great show, I think. Right, okay, so firstly, a big thank you to both of the distilleries for the samples for today's episode of the show. I hope you think it's been a balanced appraisal of the bottlings. The Copperopolis, I think, would have been absolutely fine if it wasn't for that slight Strux match note on the nose. I think it was kind of indicative of what the distillery does with regards to the use of their casks. It's just balanced, and it just, if it wasn't for that slight blemish, I'm sure it would have been absolutely lovely. Talking of absolutely lovely, the Bad Wolf 10-year-old, loved that. That was just great, you know, just balanced and sort of complex, and elegant, and you know, really nice. Loved that. The Serpents Tears, that's a tricky one, it has to be said. Insofar that the things about it I like the sort of the fact that it's a proper peated malt as opposed to being finished. I like the intensity of it. It's a bit young. I don't know. I mean, it will probably appeal to some people, it has to be said. And so it's a bit of a, for me, it's a little bit of a conflicting sort of whiskey, it has to be said. But, you know, on the whole, I think you can't argue with the quality. So, yeah, really good. The Necessary Evil, I loved that. I just loved all the bottlings of Necessary Evil that the distillery have done. Like I said, you know, stout and whiskey going together just absolutely perfectly. Sometimes they can be a bit on the heavy side, you know, and certainly the palate was probably a little bit more stout influenced, but you know, I just thought there was enough going on, enough complexity and balance to make that a really standout bottling. And you can say the same for the Amarone finish as well, really balanced, and again, you know, with the exception of, I keep banging on about their bloody port finish, and you know, with the exception of that, I think White Peaks do a wonderful job of balancing the cask and the spirit. They just seem to have this kind of good thing when it comes to the port, and you know, but you know, we're not tasting that, and I've deliberately left it out of the show. It has to be said. Well, maybe I should have included it because I've talked about it enough. But anyway, the Amarone finish, absolutely lovely. Really liked that. The Coastal Smoke, nice idea, didn't quite work in practice, I think, as I would say. And I don't want to dwell on the kind of negative aspects of anything, so I'm just going to say that a big thank you to both distilleries. I think both sets of whiskies were absolutely had their good points, shall we say, and I love both distilleries equally. So yeah. Right, so as you know, we're now starting to come to the silly season, so episodes of the show may well be a little bit less regular than normal. Almost finished doing all the decorating as well, still got, you know, paint all over my hands, but anyway, keep watching the show, please, and keep commenting. Really appreciate it, and we'll see what the Christmas one has in store. I've got it kind of lined up, and I think it might be really interesting. Well, aren't all episodes of the show really interesting? Anyway, all that's left to say is I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the show. Buy one of these whiskies, please. Support these distilleries. Good dramming. Good afternoon.